Okay, so as I was telling you people that this session we are going to first have a quick revision of what all we have done over this week. Now, if I talk about the question practice after that we are going to do, the quizzes as well as the practice portion from the study hub. So if you have a look at your portal, both the quizzes as well as the practice portions of these three chapters are already uploaded for you people in the video format. So how you're going to go about this is once you finish every chapter, you will go to the quiz, you will go to the practice part on your own, you will solve it first, and then you will proceed towards the video if needed. Wherever, let's suppose you got a question wrong or you were not able to understand the question, then you can refer to the video. Otherwise, these questions are something which you should practice on your own so that you are able to build that confidence, so that you know how these kind of questions have to be tackled. Now, since both of them are already available to you people as resources, BPP kit, I've told you in the very first session itself, our focus is going to be on two resources. One is the ACCA Study Hub and second one being your BPP kit. So these two are the resources which you will be taking care of. Now, I have decided a few questions that we can practice from the FM Kaplan kit that is being released. So I have the latest version available with me. In case you people don't have access to that, I will share that with you also. So we can practice a few MCQ questions of the chapters that we have covered so far. Okay, are you all clear with the approach that we are going to follow in today's session? Any doubts still here, guys? Okay, so before I get started with giving you people an overview, you had covered three chapters over this week, chapter 19, 1 and 3. So do you people have any queries? I am first opening the floor for you people. Do you have any doubts from these three chapters that you've done over this week? Any doubts that you people want to discuss, or should I just give you a quick walkthrough and then we can get started with the question practice? Let me know. Any doubts? Okay, so we'll have a quick walkthrough. What I will do is, allow me a moment. So we have a visual overview over here. Now, you first got started with chapter number 19 of your syllabus. That's the last chapter. I told you people why we are getting started with chapter number 19. The reason being it's ratio analysis. These are the ratios which you have learned, maybe some part of the other ACCA papers, maybe in your prior studies also. So you just learn that what are the different ratios, what are the categories, and within each category, what are the ratios that we are going to talk about. So these are the categories in front of you in a visual overview. First one is the profitability ratios. So you people went through these lectures this week. Let me know a few profitability ratios that you people have learned. What all ratios did you cover as part of the profitability category? I'm waiting for your responses, guys. You would have learnt about the gross profit margin. Yes, very good, Narmeen. Operating profit margin, your ROCE, your return on equity. These are a few profitability ratios that you people would have come across. Then you had liquidity ratios. These are the easiest ones to remember. What all ratios did you cover as part of liquidity ratios? Quick ratio, and the second one being the current ratio. What is the ideal ratio when it comes to the current ratio? You can unmute and give your answers as well. I would very much appreciate as much as you people interact with me. Yes, 2:1 is the ideal current ratio. And what is the ideal quick ratio? It's 1:1, absolutely. Then you had learnt about the efficiency ratios, or you can also call them as the activity ratios, or you can also call them as the Working capital ratios. So what all ratios did you learn as part of this category? What all do you recollect? Receivables collection period. Okay. What else? Payable payment period. Payable, it's not collection, it's the payable payment period. Very good. What else? Cash operating cycle, inventory holding period, right? These are a few ratios that you would have learned with respect to efficiency. They are also called as activity ratios, and they are also called as the working capital ratios. You would have also learned about the sales to working capital ratio. That is also one of the ratios that you would have learned here. Then the next category that you people see is the gearing or the risk ratios. So in these, what are the ratios that you people came across? What is gearing? Gearing is the presence of debt in any company's capital structure. So even if a company has, let's suppose, very small amount of debt, then we say that it is a geared company. So with respect to gearing, you people would have come across the debt to equity ratio. We can also calculate it as debt upon debt plus equity. Absolutely right. And then Harsh is saying investment covering ratio. So it was rather the interest coverage ratio. What does the interest cover ratio tell you? That within the capacity of the company, how much ever the interest the company has to pay, how much profit the company is earning so that the interest can be paid. So basically it tells you, if let's suppose as a company you have to pay interest of $20 million and you have $100 million of PBIT. So guys, how many times can you pay that interest amount? How much money do you have? $100 million can cover 5 million how many times? Or 20 million, sorry, how many times? 5 times. So that tells you that the company is in a good position. Company, whatever they have to pay, they have a very good capacity. They can pay that money as high as 5 times. So the more this number, the safer the company becomes. Then you would have come towards the next category, which is the investor ratios category. So what all ratios did you learn over here in the investor ratios? So many, a long list was there. EPS, very good. EPS was one of the ratios that you people did here. What else? EPS stands for earning per share. Dividend yield ratio, very good. What else? Earnings yield also is one of the ratios that you people would have studied. Dividend coverage ratio, all right. As an investor, when you're deciding whether you want to invest in any company, what all things do you look at? Price earning ratio, very good. So these were a few ratios that you people learned within these different categories. This chapter was pretty simple. I hope if you people have any queries from this chapter, please let me know. Or otherwise, if you're good till here, then also let me know. There was also one activity that we solved as part of this chapter in the conceptual video that you people would have watched. So do you recollect all of the numerical practice we got to do with that question? You're all with me till here? So far so good, guys? Please let me know. Are you all with me till here? Okay, so now we go towards the visual overview for the next chapter that I told you people to do, which is chapter number 1. So as part of chapter number 1, you people would have first come across the definition of financial management. So what all are we concerned with in financial management? Financial management, if you break it down into 2 words, the second word is management. Management means getting things done, and financial means it's related to money. So all of the money related decisions that you take in any business, be it with respect to where the money is going to come from, be it with respect to how you're going to invest the money, where you're going to invest the money, all of these decisions are something that we take as part of FM. So this was the definition. Prashant, would you like to say something? Okay, so you started off with this. Now, with FM, guys, we take three major decisions. Can you people let me know what three decisions fall under the scope of FM? You would have covered this as part of this chapter. What are the three decisions that you take as part of FM? Investment decision is one, right, Harsh? Two more. Dividend decision and financing decision. Absolutely right. Everybody. Good. So then you move towards what is the definition of financial accounting and management accounting. And then you study that these are all different items on their own, and how financial accounting and management accounting actually help with FM. So these are the things which you would have covered as part of the introduction of this chapter. Financial accounting is something which you people have been learning since probably the very time that you started up with commerce studies. So maybe back in your 11th and 12th in school, or maybe at the time when you went to university, you people would have studied. Even if you are an ACCA student and you appeared for all of the papers, not taking any of the exemptions, then financial accounting is the third paper of the knowledge level. So as part of that paper, you're taught what is financial accounting in an overview. What you do is all of the financial transactions that are happening in a company, you first identify them, you record them, then you analyze them, you summarize them, you produce them into a report. So all of this is what you do as part of financial accounting. Now, financial accounting and financial management, can we say that they are both the same? Is financial accounting same as financial management? No, they are different. What would you say is a more broader concept? Is financial accounting broader or financial management broader? Financial management is definitely broader, because in financial accounting, you're not really taking much of decisions. You're just recording the transactions that are happening, producing them into reports. But when it comes to financial management, you're doing some real work. You are deciding about where the money is going to be invested, where are you going to raise the money from, how many dividends are going to be distributed to the shareholders. So FM is much broader, and definitely FM gets help from the information that we record as part of financial accounting. Then you people would have come across the definition of management accounting. So again, MA is one paper that you have as part of the second exam in your knowledge level. So what is basically management accounting? If you people tell me in very simple words, what is management accounting? Okay, so you're telling me what we do as part of it, but what exactly is management accounting? As the name itself tells you, management accounting is the accounting that you do for the management. So management of a company. Guys, do you people think that if I talk about just what has happened in the past, is only past performance the concern of the management, or do they have to look at something else also? Can they just work with past performance of the company? Will that be enough for the management? If the management only sees how the company has performed in the past, that won't be sufficient, right? We need to see what we are doing today. We have to live in the present. At the same time, we have to keep planning for the future also. So as management, only the information that you record as part of FA, financial accounting, won't be sufficient. As management, you have to see how the things are looking like in the future, how we are going right now. Are we headed on the right track or not? So as part of that, you you talk about how your inventory is managed, how do you manage your costs, what kind of preparations are you going to do for the future. You prepare budgets over here. Budget is a plan that you're preparing for the future. So all of these things the management has to do. So that is why we come up with a specific accounting that we do only to help the management in taking their decisions. So management accounting and financial management, can I say that they are both the same? Will it be fair to say that? No, they are both different, but definitely the information that you collect as part of management accounting. Let's suppose I prepared a cash budget in management accounting, and today I am standing on almost the end of December 2025, and I know that the new year is just around the corner. So in management accounting, I have created a cash forecast for 3 months, and it is telling me that if the way the organization is working, if things continue this way, let's suppose by the end of February, I am going to have a very big deficit of $2 million. Now, if this is the case, and I get to know that today itself using management accounting, as financial manager, what I can do is I can already start to arrange for the funds, maybe in the form of a bank loan, maybe taking credit from someplace else, so that the organization won't have to suffer when actually those things happen and we run into a deficit. No company wants to be in a cash short position, because if you do not have enough cash and your liabilities are falling due, then the company is at the risk of insolvency. So company may be full on profitable, but if they are not having cash, then it is going to be problematic. What do you people think, guys? Is cash the same as profit? What do you people think about that? Bharat says no. Harsh also says no. So how do you say that cash and profit are different to each other? How are they not the same? Cash is the amount of money which you have in your hand, and profit is something which you record in your books of accounts. So, a very classic example that I would give you, people, you will never remember you will never forget the difference between your cash and profit. So, the best example is, let's suppose you have invested some money in some shares. You have invested 3 lakh rupees, and now they have grown to become 5 lakh rupees. Now, so far, you have not sold off your investments. If I come to you guys and I ask you, can you people give me 1,000 rupees? What will you say? Can you give me 1,000 rupees? You're in a profit of 2 lakh rupees. But if I ask you to give me 1,000, you don't have any money with you, because all the money that you have, all the profits that you have, they are still locked up in your investments. Also, a very good point by Bharat, that profits can be window dressed. But the amount of money that you have in your bank account, the cash that you have, that is something which you cannot manipulate. It's a balance that you have or you don't have. So this is the concept about the difference between profit and cash. So a company may be having loads and loads of profits, but if they do not have cash, guys, do you think a company can sustain for very long without cash? If a company doesn't have cash, can the company succeed? No, the company is not going to be able to pay the salaries of the employees, not going to be able to pay for the raw materials that the company is buying. So if that happens, the company is going to go bankrupt. The company will become insolvent, and we will have to shut down the company. So with management accounting, the information that we get as financial managers, we can do our job better with the help of information that we are getting using both financial accounting also and management accounting as well. Then you people would have moved towards the next concept, where you would have learnt about strategy on and objectives. So a company has both of these things decided for themselves. They have a strategy, and then they have their own objectives. If I talk about the strategy, guys, what do you understand by the term strategy? What do you guys understand by the term strategy? You people have covered these concepts this week. Let me know, what do you mean by strategy? Okay. So let me give you an example so that you will be able to understand exactly what strategy is. Now you all have this goal, you have this objective to achieve. Yes, very good answer, Harsh. That how do you plan to get to some target that you want to achieve? So now we are all here, all of the students who are here with me today, you're all planning to prepare for the FM paper and pass the FM paper with good marks in March 2026 attempt. So that is the goal that you have set for yourself. Now you have set the goal, but is the goal going to achieve itself? Will you magically automatically clear the paper without doing anything? Is that possible? No. So you are going to think about how you are going to get there. So how you can go towards clearing your FM paper with good marks in March attempt? You have to first cover your syllabus, then you have to revise, then you have to do your practice, you have to do your tests, you have to do your mocks, you have to do the past paper practice, you have to do the examiner reports practice. So this is the plan of action that you have created for yourself, that these are the checklists that I have created. These are the things that I will do so that I will be able to achieve my goal of clearing the FM paper with good marks. So strategy is basically this, the plan of action that you've created, that I'll do these things so that I can achieve my ultimate objective. That is the very definition of strategy. It's the plan of action that you create to achieve your goals. So for any organization, the goal could be to maximize their profits. So what is the strategy that they want to put? Strategy could be, we want to increase our sales by this much proportion, we want to decrease our costs by this much proportion, we want to increase the number of customers by this much percentage. So this could be the strategy that the company would want to follow. And then you people learnt about the concept of objective. We all know what's the meaning of objective. Objective is a goal, it's a target which you set, which you want to achieve in the near future. Now when the company sets its objective, you call it as the corporate objective. When the company is setting the goal, you say that it is the corporate's objective. And then you learnt about financial objectives. So where the company wants to head financially, that is what you learnt as part of this concept. Now guys, with FM, what's the ultimate financial objective that we want to achieve? What's the ultimate financial objective? That's the aim for every company. Maximizing the wealth of the shareholders. Absolutely right, Bharat. Then you people would have moved towards the concept of the not-for-profit organizations. These are entities which are not like regular companies who are there in the market to make money. What are they here for? What are not-for-profit organizations here for? They are here for providing welfare related goods or services. Maybe their aim is to help the underprivileged students. Maybe their aim is to help the elderly people who may be left behind. So different things which are related to serving the society. They don't want to make profits. They want to serve a social purpose. So if I measure, let's suppose there are two kinds of people who want to achieve different things in life. So let's just take an example of two animals, a fish and a tiger. So if I draw a comparison between them both, I will say that tiger is so good because tiger can run on the ground so fast, and fish is so good because the fish can swim in the water very fast. But if I say that fish is a very bad animal because it can't run on the ground, and then I say tiger is a very bad animal because it can't swim in the water, do you people think that criticizing them upon these criteria will be a good thing to do? Will it be a good comparison to compare different skills that they have? No. Why? Because their objectives are different. The way that they operate, the way they are meant to be, that is different. Fish is meant to be in the water, so its expertise should be water. Tiger is meant to live on the ground, so its expertise also should be on the ground. Same way we have the profit-making companies and the not-for-profit organizations. Profit-making companies are here in the market to make money, to make profits. NPOs, on the other hand, are for achieving some or the other kind of greater purpose. So if I compare, let's suppose, how do we analyze the performance of the profit-making companies? We have a look at their ratios, we see their profitability ratios and all other different kinds of ratios. So guys, do you people think that if I want to measure the performance of a not-for-profit organization, will it make sense if I evaluate them, if I judge them on the basis of their profitability? Does that make sense? No. So their performance should be evaluated on what they want to achieve. So to measure their performance, we cannot use ratios. So we came up with another model. You people would have covered that in the lectures. Can you people let me know the name of the model that you covered? What is the name of the model or the approach? How do you measure the performance of NPOs? Did you forget? It's the value for money model, isn't it? And as a part of it, you people would have covered 3 E's. What are the 3 E's? Can you name those for me? Economy is one, okay. Other two, efficiency, very good. And the third one being effectiveness, very good. Economy, if I talk about the crux, the core idea is minimizing the cost of the inputs. If I talk about efficiency, the core idea is maximizing the output to input ratio, and effectiveness is all about achieving of the final objective which the NPO had eventually set. So these are the 3 E's that you people would have learned as part of not-for-profit organizations. Then you people would have moved towards the conflict of interest. So you would have come across the agency theory. Now we know that the real owners of the company, guys, who would we say is the real owner of any company? Who are the real owners? Shareholders, very good. And do shareholders run the company on their own? Do they manage the company on their own on a day-to-day basis? No. Who does that? Who manages the company? It's the board of directors, or you can say the executive directors, or you can say the management of the company. Now, owners are different, managers are different. If I give you people the example of, let's suppose, two different people, one is a person who is doing a 9 to 5 job for a boss that they are serving. One is a person who works for his own. He has his own business and he is self-employed over there. So out of these two people that I talk to you people about, who do you think will be more motivated to do the work nicely? A person who is an employee somewhere or a person who has his own business? Who would be more motivated? Person one or person two? The person who owns their own business is going to definitely be more motivated. Why? Because the more amount of money he makes, that will solely go towards him only. So we know that if you are working on the behalf of someone else, if you're working for someone else, it's a very human nature that we may not do our best, or sometimes we may even try to prioritize our own interest rather than the boss's interest. So for dealing with this thing, we have this problem called as the agency problem, that the shareholders are not doing the management on their own. They are hiring someone on their behalf to do the management. So we say that shareholders are the principal and the management is the agent of the shareholders. Why? Because they are acting on behalf of the shareholders. They are running the company. They are taking the decisions, the day-to-day operations of the company. On whose behalf? On the behalf of the shareholders. So shareholders are the principal and the agents become the directors. So this is what you would have studied as part of agency theory. Now, you would also come across the concept of stakeholders. In a company, if I ask you people, firstly, let me know, do you people understand who are stakeholders in the first place? What's the meaning of stakeholders? Okay, so stakeholders are basically people who may have any interest in the company or who are affected by the organization's actions. So, very simple definition is anyone who is affected by the activities of the organization will be a stakeholder. So, for a company, who can be different stakeholders? Harsh has already given two examples. Suppliers are stakeholders, customers are stakeholders. Who else is affected by the actions of the company? Can we have some more examples, guys? Employees, government, tax authorities, shareholders, management, the banks, if we are taking any loans, right? So these are different stakeholders. We can also say the general community, the normal people who are living around us, they are also part of the stakeholders. Why? Because if, let's suppose, a company has a factory where the factory is releasing toxic waste in the nearby areas where houses are located. So that toxic waste is causing a decline in the health of the people who are living nearby. So generally, everyone in the public gets affected with the actions of the company. So these are the different stakeholders in a company. Now, you would have the next concept that you would have learned over here is that the directors and shareholders, they trust each other? Do the shareholders trust the directors? No, they have big trust issues. Why? Because the shareholders think that the management may take some decisions which may not be in the best interests of the shareholders. They may try to take priority of their own interests and they may not be doing something which is in the best interest of the company, right? Directors are managers, whereas shareholders are owners. So they are constantly thinking, they're overthinking, what if the management tries to cheat me? So for that, there are different solutions that we have come up with to manage this particular trust issue. And this trust issue is not something which is a bad thing to have, because historically, guys, we have seen that managements of companies have been successfully pulling off very big scams. If people would have heard about the Enron scandal, the Arthur Anderson firm, which used to operate in US, what basically happened was that the auditors and the management of the company, they joined hands. So what happened is that the management was committing a fraud with the money of the shareholders, and the auditors, because they joined hands together, auditors were constantly telling the shareholders that the company is in good health, everything is in order. So both of them, the auditors as well as the management, they were cheating the shareholders. They were diverting the funds of the shareholders to their own selves. So because of all of these frauds and scams and scandals, the shareholders really started to have these issues that what if the management tries to cheat us? So to stop that, we have a few solutions that we have come up with. One of them being about the reward schemes that you offer to your managers. So the problem is that the directors do not own the company, they're just an employee of the company. So we have come up with an idea that let's give them stock options, let's give them ESOPs. What are ESOPs, guys? What do you understand by ESOPs or stock options? Have you heard this term before? You would have covered this as part of the concepts. You can unmute if you'd like. Anyone? Yes, you give them incentives. So if you talk about ESOPs, the main meaning is I give my director today a contract where I've written that no matter what the share price of the company is, you are going to be able to get a 20% discount on the share price. So if, let's suppose, hypothetically speaking, 5 years later, if the share price is $100, you are going to be able to buy the same shares at $80 after 5 years. So what happens is now the directors also, they have in a way indirectly become the owners of the company. Some part of the company also belongs to them. So now they will not think about cheating the company. They will know if they become honest with the company, if they do so good for the company that the company's share price grows, the more the share price is going to grow, the more is the gain that they will be able to generate because of the option that they have been given. So different schemes, bonuses are awarded to them, incentives are given to them, so that they also form their opinion in a manner that we want to do the best for the company, because if the company gets the best, then the bonuses will also be best for the managers. And further, one more solution that we have come up with is corporate governance. You would have heard this terminology, especially if you have done papers like audit and financial reporting before. What is corporate governance, guys? In very simple language, what's the definition of corporate governance? What's the definition of corporate governance? Yes, it's the way the companies are directed and controlled. So we have developed a system that companies will be controlled in this particular manner. So governments all around the world, they have created rules and regulations. Can you people let me know a few principles of good corporate governance that you have studied as part of the lectures? If a company is having good corporate governance, what should be the things that they should have? Should the CEO and chairman be the same person? No, CEO and chairman should be separate. Should any director be involved in setting their own remuneration? If let's suppose Harsh is the director in the company, and when you are talking about setting of the salaries, Harsh is setting his own salary. Do you think that will be a good thing to do, guys? If Harsh is setting is his own salary, what will he do? He will allow himself a very handsome salary. Even he might not even deserve such a big amount of salary, still he is going to give a very big amount of salary to himself. So remuneration should also be set by the non-executive directors. Are you people aware about the two kinds of directors that are there in a company, EDs and NEDs? What's the main difference between them? Executive directors are the ones whose salaries, whose bonuses depend upon the performance of the company. So if the company makes more profits, they get more salaries. But if you talk about the non-executive directors, here what are the chances that if the executive directors bonuses depend upon the sales, maybe, or if it depends upon the profits, maybe the executive director may try to manipulate the amounts, may try to massage the numbers just to artificially show higher profits so that he gets a higher bonus. So to check upon that, shareholders come up with the idea of hiring non-executive directors. Who are non-executive directors? They do not have any interest in the company. They are somebody whose salaries are fixed salaries. So shareholders go to these people and they tell them that you're going to get this much amount of money as part of your salary. Your main work is to keep a check on what the executive directors are doing, so that if they do anything illegal or if they try to do something which is not best for the company, the non-executive directors are going to come and tell that to the shareholders, and shareholders will be able to catch the executive directors or maybe stop them from doing something that is bad for the company. So they are basically acting like watchdogs so that it can be ensured that the executive directors don't just do anything and everything that they want to do with the company, and they will always be following what is legal and what is actually the best for the company. So these were a few principles that should be there if you want to have a good corporate governance in your company. So all of this you people learned as part of chapter number 1. Anything more that you people would like to discuss over here? Any queries in chapter 1, guys? If you're all with me, please let me know. Arjun, Bharat, Narmeen, Roshan, are you all with me till here? Okay. So now coming towards the revision of the last chapter that you people did as part of this week's targets. This is chapter number 3 and the name of the chapter is investment decisions. So you started off the chapter first by understanding that there are two kinds of expenditures that a company can do. This is something which you people would have covered as part of your basics also. There are two kinds of expenditure. One is capital expenditure, another is revenue expenditure. Capital expenditure is anything which gives you a benefit for more than 12 months, and revenue expenditure is any expenditure that you incur which gives you benefit for lesser than 12 months. Example of capital expenditure, can you tell me? What would be the example of capital expenditure? Any investments that you make, maybe you bought a machinery, maybe you bought a piece of land, maybe you bought some equipment. So these are all things. Yes, purchase of non-current assets will be a part of capital expenditure. And if I talk about revenue expenditure, what could be a few examples? Revenue expenditure is, you can say, repair and maintenance of these assets. That will be a day-to-day expense. It is not something which is going to give you a benefit for more than 12 months. So purchase of non-current assets is capital expenditure. And if you're spending any money to get some broken machinery repaired, or if you're getting the maintenance done, maybe you're getting the service done. So like how you people see, we have air conditioners in the offices. So once the winters are going to be over and summers come back, we are going to get the servicing done for the air conditioner. So that is the repair and maintenance expenditure, which will be classified as revenue expenditure. So these are the two different types of expenditures that we have studied. Now this chapter actually marks the beginning of the investment appraisal unit of your syllabus. Right from this chapter till chapter number 7 that you people have as part of your syllabus, this is all the investment appraisal unit of your syllabus. So here in this particular chapter, you're learning two ways by which you can evaluate any investment. So the first method that you people learned is the payback period. In a summary, if I tell you people, what does payback period mean? Very easy words if you people try to tell me, what does payback period mean? What does payback period mean? Come on, guys, the name itself is telling you the meaning. You would have studied the concepts also. You can unmute as well if you would like to do that. Roshan, what is payback period? Narmeen, would you like to say? Yes, absolutely. It's the duration, how much time it is going to take to get your initial investment back from the investment. So, how do you calculate the payback period? If the amount of money that you are getting every year, if the cash flows every year are the same, then you use the formula initial investment divided by the cash flow that you're getting every year. And if it is different every year, the amount of money that you receive from the project is changing on year to year basis, then you add the numbers together to find out how much time it is taking to get your initial investment back. What are the advantages that you people studied as this method? It's simple, it's easy to calculate. It is something which helps you focus on your earlier cash flows. Earlier cash flows are more certain. Why? Because the more further you go into the future, the uncertainty increases. So it's best to focus on what you're going to get concretely for sure in the near future. Then you would have come across the disadvantages. Disadvantages, it does not consider the time value of money. The target that you people compare it to is subjective. And what else can you say? It is not considering the whole life of the project. These could be the advantages, the disadvantages that you people would have studied as part of the payback period method. And if I ask you people the decision rule, how do you take a decision using payback method? You compare the project's payback with a target. So if target is more than the payback period of the project, then if let's suppose I give you an example here, I have a target that I want to get my money back from the projects after 2 years, and a project has come to me which will return my money after 3 years. Do you think I should take this project? My target is to get the money back after 2 years. This will give me my money back after 3 years. Do you think I should take it up? No, it is taking longer than I am targeting. But if in a vice versa example, my target was 2 years and this project is giving me my initial investment back in 1.5 years, do you think now I can take this up? Yes. So if you can just set the decision rule that if your target is being met, then you accept it. If your target is not being met, then you reject the project. So this was about the payback method, and a possible improvement in this you will learn as part of chapter 4, where you will learn how to calculate the discounted payback period. So you will learn to consider the time value of money. Do you guys know that money loses its value over time? Are you familiar with that concept? Are you people aware that money loses its value over time? What are the reasons? Why does that happen? Okay, one reason is inflation. So this is the probably the most commonly seen something that you would have seen in your day-to-day life also. If most of the students over here are from India, so we have this instant noodles called as Maggi over here. If you go back a little bit back in time, maybe 7 years earlier, a packet of Maggi used to cost 10 rupees over here in our currency. But if I want to get that same packet of Maggi today in the market, I have to pay maybe 14 or 15 rupees to get that same packet. So that means that I have to pay more amount of money for the same thing which earlier I used to have to pay lesser for. So that means the value of my money is falling. For the same thing now I have to pay more. So this is reason number 1. There are 2 more reasons why money loses its value over time. Another reason is the risk factor. So the more you try to go into the future, if I ask you people, can you predict what will happen tomorrow versus can you predict what will happen after 10 years from today? Which one will be easier to predict, tomorrow or 10 years later? Which one would be easier to predict? Tomorrow would be easier. Why? Because 10 years is a very far away time. You don't know what are the things that can happen in such a big time span. So the more further you go into the future, uncertainty increases. That is why the money that you receive as and when later, the value keeps on falling down because the uncertainty increases. And the third reason that you have is the preference for present consumption. So if let's suppose you people have maybe $100 in your pocket today, and you have decided you have a shopping cart that you have kept ready, you would just going to the shop to pay those $100 and buy those shopping cart that you had set for yourself. Now, before you do that, I come to you people and I tell you, hey, listen, do not spend these $100. Give them to me. I will invest them in some place and then I will give you more money in return. Now, this shopping cart that you had created, you were waiting for a very long time and finally you were about to go to the shop and, buy the things that you like. But then I came to you with this investment scheme. So now you people, what are you going to say? That, okay, you can take the money, but give me better returns because I am foregoing something which I really wanted to do today. So the money that you're receiving today is more valuable because the further you go into the future, more you have to delay your present consumption. Maybe if you have that money today, you could have invested that in some place else and you could have made return out of it. So these are the three main reasons why money has time value. So in chapter number 4, you're going to learn that with the payback period, you're going to see that all the cash flows that the projects give you, we will find out how much will be the value of the money that you're going to receive in the future. So maybe if I tell you people that I will give you 10,000 rupees 10 years later, would you people be able to buy the things in 10,000 that you can buy today 10 years from now? If you have the same amount of money, would you be able to buy those same things that you can buy today? Would that be possible? The Maggie packet that you used to buy with 10 rupees maybe 5-7 years back, can you use those same 10 rupees to get that same Maggie packet today? Will that be sufficient? Can you use that money, same 10 rupees, to buy that same the packet of Maggie? Would that be possible? No, right? So that's why the money that you're going to receive in the future, today it is worth lesser. So you are going to find out the present values and then you will calculate the payback period of the projects. That is something that you will learn in deep in chapter number 4. And then the second method that you people covered as part of this chapter is the ROCE method, the return on capital employed. So the formula is pretty simple. You take the average annual profit for the year and then you divide it by the average investment, or in some cases the initial investment. So if you people want to find out the average investment, what's the formula for that? What's the formula for the average investment? How do you find out the average of anything in general? You take the sum of observations divided by number of observations. Absolutely right, Bharat. So here what we are having is, if I want to find out my average investment, I have to take the opening value plus the closing value and divide that by 2. So my opening value is nothing but the initial investment and closing value is the scrap value. So you add both of these numbers and you divide them by 2 to find out your average investment. And then you people move towards the advantages and disadvantages. So advantage is something that it is again simple, easy to calculate, easy to understand. Profits are something which even the non-finance related background people can also understand. You have to use the information which is readily available. You have numerator as profits, denominator as investment value. These numbers are very easily available in the books of accounts of the company. So these are the advantages, but in disadvantages, we have a few ones which are common from payback period that first, a disadvantage is that it is based upon profits, and profits can always be manipulated. Books of accounts can always be manipulated. And then again, the target rate is subjective. In ROCE also, how do we take the decision? We compare it with our target. So if, let's suppose, I give you people an example, the company where I'm working, my target is to have a return of 20% on all my investments. If I'm getting a project opportunity which is giving me 18% of ROCE, should I accept that project? My target is to earn 20%. This project is giving me 18%. Should I go ahead? No, it is giving me lesser than I want. But if another project is offering me 25% return, should I accept that project then? Yes, absolutely. So how do you make your decision? You compare it with the target. If the return is more than the target, you go ahead with it. If the return is lesser than the target, then you reject the project. So disadvantages was one that your target that you are setting, that is set by the management, and management are nobody but human beings. Human beings can make mistakes. So if the target is set in a wrong manner, the decision that you take using ROCE will also turn out to be wrong. So these were a few disadvantages that you people would have studied as part of ROCE. Any doubts, anything that you would want to discuss as part of chapter number 3? Are you all with me till here? Any queries, anything that bothers you till here, guys? Okay, so if you're all good till here, we have had a quick revision, a quick walkthrough of all of the chapters that you have covered before coming to this session today over the previous week. So now I will take you people to a few questions that I have shortlisted for you guys from the Kaplan kit. Just let me know if you people can now see on your screen the kit being presented. Is the kit visible on the screen to you? Guys, can you confirm if the kit is visible? Okay, so because you people are not done yet with the entire unit of investment appraisal, as I was mentioning, from chapter number 3 till chapter number 7, you have the entire investment appraisal unit. If I just quickly show you people what your index of the kit looks like. So what they've done is they have given you the questions in a section wise format. So first in the kit, they've given you all section A questions, then section B questions, and then section C questions. So as part of section A, in respect to the first chapter that you people have done, 23 MCQs are available. And then with respect to chapter number 3 that you people have done, which comes under investment appraisal units, questions from 93 to 122 are from the investment appraisal unit. But since again, like I'm telling you people that you've only done with the first chapter of this unit, that's why you're not yet in a position to solve all the questions that are coming over here. So what I've done is I've already marked those questions, which are the ones that we can practice till the concepts that we have covered so far. So this is question number 1 in front of you. 107 is the one that we will be discussing. Let's read through the question together and then you people can tell me your answers. The question is asking you, the payback period is the number of years that it takes a business to recover its original investment from the net returns. So here they have given you nothing but the definition of the payback period. You have to select the correct items from the drop down choices. So you have to tell about this particular definition, that payback is calculated before or after depreciation and before or after taxation. So you people let me know, when you're talking about the payback period, do you consider the cash flows or do you consider the profits? You consider the cash flows. Now you tell me your answers. Will it be before depreciation or will it be after charging depreciation? Let me know, what should I select, before or after? What do the others think? Narmeen, Arjun, Roshan, what do you guys think? In the payback period, I am looking at cash flows. What kind of an expense is depreciation? Is depreciation a cash expense or is it a non-cash expense? Non-cash. So should I subtract depreciation from the cash flows? Does it involve actual cash going out of my pocket? No. So what should be the answer? Before depreciation or after depreciation? You take the cash flows. Let me know, before or after depreciation, before charging or after charging depreciation. What should be the answer? Absolutely right, Arjun. It should be before depreciation. So, because depreciation is a non cash item, it is not going to affect my cash flows. If it has been subtracted, then I should be adding it back because it is a non cash item. This amount of depreciation never actually went out from my pocket in form of cash. This is only a bookish entry. So this will be before depreciation. Now tell me that what will it be for taxes? Will it be before tax or will it be after tax? How is the tax charged for any company? Do companies actually have to pay the taxes in the form of cash, or is tax also a bookish entry? Okay, Arjun says after tax. How about the others? Bharat also says after tax, and you people are right. So you're going to take the after tax amount. Why? Because the business pays tax in the form of cash. So in payback period, I am basically seeing that with the net cash flow that the company is generating from a project, how long does it take for me to recover my initial investment? Depreciation is something which is a non-cash item. I don't actually have to pay it in the form of cash. So if let's suppose I have $10,000 in my bank account, if I have $1,000 of depreciation charge on my machine, will the bank balance of mine change because of this depreciation? Will it change because of $1,000 of depreciation? No. So that is why I will be taking the before depreciation figure. And if I talk about the taxes, let's suppose as per my books of accounts, I have to pay the government $2,000 of taxes. So when I pay this much amount of tax to the government, how much money will remain in my bank account? How much money is going to remain in my bank account? 10,000 I had, 2,000 I have given to the government. So now I will have $8,000 in my bank account. So that means taxes are something which I actually as a business have to pay in form of cash to the government. So I will be considering the after taxes cash flow. Are you all with me on this question? Have you understood both the parts about depreciation as well as taxes? Should I take you people to the next one? Okay. So the next one is question number 113. Read through the question properly, think and let me know your answers. You people have to select two statements about investment appraisal methods of ROCE and payback. These are the two techniques that you people have learned as part of chapter 3. So four statements are given. Out of this, two are incorrect and two are correct. You have to tell me which two are correct. Okay, I'm starting to receive answers. I'll wait 30 more seconds, then we'll discuss. Great. Arjun, Roshan, you people also let me know. You have to select two. I hope that you people know that if in your exam two options have to be selected, you are able to select one option correctly and one option you have identified as wrong. How many marks do you people get out of two? It's a flat zero, absolutely. So if you want to have the marks, you have to be completely bang on. Both of the choices should be correct. Bharat and Amin both are saying option C and D, and you people are absolutely right. Let's go through the statements one by one. First statement tells me that both methods are affected by changes in the cost of capital. Guys, in your calculations for ROCE or in the calculation of payback period, did you anywhere use the cost of capital? Anything like that? Did you use in your calculations? No. So the first statement cannot be a right statement. Talk about the second one. ROCE does not take account of the returns over the entire life of the project. What do? You take the total profit of the project divided by the number of years to find out the average annual profit. So you are considering the entire life of the project. So statement B also cannot be your answer. Now talking about statement C. Statement C says that the payback method is based on the cash flows of the project. This is exactly what we have studied. What does the payback period measure? It tells you how much time does it take for the company to recover the initial investment in the form of cash flows from the project. So this is the very definition. That is why this will be one of our correct answers. Moving towards the fourth statement now, a requirement for an early payback can increase the company's liquidity. So if the payback is happening early, that means the company is getting the money back on a timely basis. So will it help with liquidity if my money comes back to me quickly? If I receive cash quicker, I will be in a better liquidity position. So both statements C and D are our answers in this particular scenario. I hope that both of the statements are clear to you why C and D are correct and why A and B should not be the right answers. My students, I want the best way to practice, the best way to prepare for your paper is all the questions that you people practice, whatever answers you people are marking as correct, you should know the reason why you are marking them as correct, and at the same time the other options which you are leaving, which you are saying that these are not the correct answers, you should also know the reason why those options are incorrect. So let me know if you have any doubts in any of the four statements that you people see, and then we will proceed to the next question. Are you all good till here? Okay. Moving towards the next one, it is 117. What is Peach Company's return on capital employed? So you are given with the information. In addition to this, the extract of the statement of financial position is also given to you. You're given the equity, you're given the non-current liabilities. So calculate, take maybe 45 seconds and calculate this and let me know. What is the formula for ROCE? You've done this as part of chapter number 19. You have to take your operating profit and you have to divide it by your capital employed. Until and unless it's not specifically mentioned, Bharat, we take the initial investment itself. We do not take the average. So here you can take the capital employed. Capital employed is indirectly given to you. You're given with the equity and you're given with the non-current liabilities. You people would have learned two formulae to work around the capital employed. Either you can take the sum of equity and non-current liabilities. What is the other formula? You take the total assets and from that you can subtract your current liabilities. I'll write down just in case you people have forgotten. Capital employed can be calculated in two ways. Either you can take the total of your equity plus the non-current liabilities, or what you can also do is take the total of your assets and from that take away your current liabilities. Both ways you can work around the capital employed. Okay, so I'm getting one answer from Bharat. How about the others? What is Peach Company's ROCE? It's very simple now. You have to take operating profit in the numerator, that is 2500, and you have to divide it with the total of both these numbers, which is 12,500. And then you have to multiply that by 100%. So that is going to give you 20% as your answer. Has everyone understood question number 117? You're all with me till here? Fairly easy, this one. Arjun, Roshan, you're both with me? Okay. Moving towards question 118 now. Here you have to calculate the initial return on capital employed for the project. That means you will be taking the initial investment to the nearest whole percentage. So guys, one more thing before you get started with solving. When it is asking you nearest whole percentage, you are not supposed to give answer in any decimal places. So for a random example, if your answer is coming out to 14.8%, what will you enter over here? If your answer is coming to 14.8, you will enter 15%. Be very careful with this, guys, because if you're not following the rounding of instructions in your exam properly, you can end up losing marks. The reason is section A and B of your FM paper have zero human involvement. They are completely computer marked. The computer is fed the correct number as per the rounding instructions. So even if you have calculated it correctly as 14.8%, still the computer will mark it incorrect because the computer has been fed that the correct answer is 15%. So please give attention to the for a rounding of instructions which the question has told you and follow them very strictly, very properly to avoid losing out on marks which you could have otherwise earned. So now get to solving this question 118. A company undertakes a project that involves purchasing machinery at a cost of $65,000. The machinery is used on the project for 4 years, generating operating cash inflows of $20,000 per year. It is sold at the end of the project for $10,000 and taxes are charged at the rate of 30%. So let me know your answers for initial ROCE over here. I'm giving you people a 1 minute and 30 seconds. Okay, Narmeen is saying that the answer is 22%. I think that it is going to be a different figure. I was doing my own workings. Let's see. Waiting for a few more answers also, then we'll discuss. Be careful that here you're calculating the ROCE. What you're given readily, 20,000, that's the cash flows. Do you consider cash flows in ROCE? Or is it the profits that you consider here? Any more answers? Bharat, Arjun, Roshan, are you people solving? Do you want me to wait or should we discuss this together now? Okay, I'll give you a 1 more minute. Okay, so I've received Bharat's answer also. Let's solve this one together and see what will be the correct answer. So I know that for the ROCE, what's the formula that I'm supposed to use? I am supposed to take my average annual profit, and then I am supposed to divide it with my initial investment. This is the thing that I'm supposed to work with. Now I am given with cash flows of $20,000 every year. Now I have to convert this cash flow into profit. So in cash flows, all of the non-cash items will not be considered. So if I want to go towards profits come after charging each and every expense, and depreciation is also an expense which I charge before I come towards my profits. So that means I have to first calculate the depreciation. I will subtract that from my cash flows. Then I will be able to get to my numerator. So now my work becomes to see how much depreciation is going to be charged over every year. Now they are telling me that this machinery will be used for 4 years and I will purchase it for $65,000 and it is going to be sold for $10,000. That means how much amount will I have to charge depreciation on? 65 is the initial value and I sell it for 10,000. So how much of the machine am I actually using? How much is the amount I should put depreciation on? It will be the initial investment minus the scrap value, that is 55,000. Now 55,000 is the value which I am using over 4 years. So how much should be the depreciation every year? How much depreciation should you charge every year? 55,000 divided by 4, which is going to give you 13,750. 55,000 divided by 4, which is going to give you 13,750. Now, this is the amount of depreciation that you're going to be charging per year. So, if you are having 20,000 as your cash flows, that means how much will your profits look like? 20,000 minus 13,750, which is going to give you 6250. This will be your average annual profit, and you have to divide this figure with your initial investment. So your initial investment is also readily given to you in the question as $65,000. So if you take 6250, divide that by 65,000, divide this figure by 65,000, then you're going to get your answer as 9.6%, which if you round it to the nearest whole percentage, what will you give as your answer, guys? What should I enter as my final answer? It's 9.6. So what should I enter? Arjun, we are not supposed to consider the tax over here because the formula that you people have learned is the average annual operating profit. Operating profit is PBIT. Your PBIT will be first, once the PBIT figure has come, then you subtract interest, then you subtract tax. But we stop at PBIT for the ROCE. So tax will be considered later, not for ROCE. Right? So if I'm getting 9.6 as my answer, what will I input in this box? I will input 10%. Absolutely. So 10 is what you will enter over here. Any doubts in this numerical? Are you all with me? Okay. So moving towards the last question, that is question number 120. In relation to the return on capital employed investment appraisal method, which of the following statements is correct? So all of these statements are about ROCE. You have to tell me that which statement out of these is correct. Only one is correct. You have to select the correct one. Read through them and let me know your answers. Okay, so I'm starting to receive answers. Bharat says it will be B. What do the others say? Narmeen, Arjun, Roshan. What do you guys think? It's okay, you can be wrong. No harm in that, but I want everybody to try. Yes, what would be your best guess if you're not able to get to the correct answer? If this comes up in your exam, you people have all promised me you will not leave even a single mark of question unanswered in your paper. So if this comes up, what will you mark as your answer? Okay. Arjun and Roshan, what do you people think? Great. Okay. So I'll tell you guys that all those who are saying option D, you're absolutely correct. Option D is the right answer. Option D tells you that ROCE takes into account all years of operation of an investment project. That is exactly what you people have studied. That payback period only considers the time frame until payback happens, but ROC is taking all the years of the operations. Why? Because you take the total profits, you divide that by the number of years to find out the average annual operating profit. So you're considering each and every year of the operations of the project. So D is correct. Now we have to understand why A, C, and D are wrong answers. Option A tells you that ROCE will lead to better investment decisions because it uses accounting profit rather than cash flows. Guys, if I'm using profits over cash flows, is it a good thing? Bharat says no. Why is using accounting profit a bad thing then? Why is it bad to use accounting profits? Yes, absolutely. Accounting profits can be manipulated. They can be window dressed. Creative accounting can be done. So if something can be manipulated, the analysis that you do on those manipulated numbers, that analysis will also turn out to be incorrect. So always and always when you have to make a choice between profits or cash flows, always cash flows will be preferred because cash flows cannot be manipulated. Whatever balance you have in your bank, it is shown to you in your maybe the bank's mobile application that you've downloaded, or maybe the passbook that the bank has given you. So that balance is something which you have right in your account. But if I talk about the profits, they are that may be notional profits. Maybe I have not yet sold off the investments. Maybe I have shown inflated numbers by doing manipulation. So always when given the choice, cash flows are considered superior in comparison to your profits. So statement A cannot be your right answer. Talking about statement B, it tells you investment projects which have an ROCE greater than the weighted average cost of capital should be accepted. So it is not necessary. What do you compare with when you want to take a decision? What's the rule that you people have learned? What do you compare the project's ROCE with? Do you compare it with the weighted average cost of capital? What's the decision rule? We were just revising. You compare the project's ROCE with? Come on, guys, we just did this. We compare it with the target ROCE. So as I was giving you people examples also, if my target is to earn a return of 20%, one project gives me 18%, I will say no, that is too less for me. One project that gives me 25%, I will say yes, I wanted 20, you're giving me more than what I want, so I will definitely accept you. So what do you draw a comparison with? You draw a comparison with the target ROI to the project's ROI or ROCE. So weighted average cost of capital is not something that you compare it with. You compare it with the target ROCE. That is why statement B also cannot be the right answer. Now moving towards the third statement that you have, investment projects which have an ROCE less than the current ROCE of the company should be rejected. Guys, do you think that we can generalize this, that if a project has lesser ROCE, we should simply reject? Do companies only have to do things for profits only, or sometimes there can be exceptions? Maybe when it could be about the reputation of the company, maybe when it could lead to long term benefits for the company. So companies still may have to take projects with lower ROCE because of the other benefits that the projects bring to the company. So it's not always necessary that any project which is giving me lesser return than what my current project is giving me, I will always reject that. Maybe let's suppose the current project which I'm doing at the company is giving a return of 25%. I have a new project which has come up to me, and this project gives a return of 21%. So if I draw a comparison, what I am earning right now, I am earning right now 25%. What I would earn with this new project is 21%. So definitely what I am earning right now is higher. But when I take the decision for the new project, what will I compare 21% with? How do you take the decision? You consider the project's ROCE in comparison to your target. Your target is to get 20% return, but this project is giving you 21%. What will you do with the project? Will you reject it? Will you accept it? You are going to accept the project. So that is why statement C cannot be your answer. It says we will simply reject if it is giving you lesser return than the current projects. So it is only option D which should be marked as your correct answer. Any doubts in any of the statements that you see? All four of them, why A, B, C are incorrect and why D is correct? Any doubts, guys? Are you all with me? Okay, so this is what I had planned for your session today. Now, tomorrow onwards, your targets are just like I've been sharing over this week. I will be sharing the targets that you have to cover from the coming Monday onwards. And then again, we are going to meet either on Saturday or on Sunday. And if needed, we will meet on both of the days. So I will let you know as in when we inch closer, maybe on Thursday or Friday, I'll let you people know that what are the days that we are going to be having our live sessions. In the middle of the week also, guys, if you feel any queries, any difficulties, if you face, please feel free to reach out. You can message over the WhatsApp group that we have created, or you can even reach out to me personally over the number that that I have on the group. So you can message me however you people feel convenient, and I will be helping you out. And with respect to the live session, I'll meet you people again on the next weekend. So in the meantime, keep practicing, keep studying, and I'll see you the next time. If you do not have any queries, this is where we are going to conclude. If you have any doubts, you may ask. If you don't have any queries, then I'll see you the next time. All the best. Have a nice week. Most welcome.